Screams of Silence, the story of Brenda Q. I've been putting off talking about this episode for a while because, frankly, I didn't know how to approach talking about this episode at all. This is a notorious episode of Family Guy about physical, verbal, and mental domestic abuse. And if you're thinking it's an episode making fun of this subject, you are sorely mistaken. There are jokes in this episode, and I'd go so far as to say they're even pretty good at times. But the focus of this episode is not on comedy, it's on drama. Which, you know, for me is great to hear, because as a fan of Family Guy, I watch that show to feel horrible. This episode of, and I'm gonna say it again, Family Guy of all things, is about Quagmire's sister being trapped in an abusive relationship with a scummy dirtbag. You know, Quagmire, that character from Family Guy, the guy who says giggity. Giggity, 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 giggity. You know, the who else but Quagmire guy, the guy who forced himself on Marge Simpson as a joke that one time. Well, wait a minute.
A lot of time and energy to this relationship with some expectation that it could grow into something much more significant, and if you're just stringing her...
Why the hell, out of all of the characters in Family Guy, would they use Quagmire for the super serious story about physical and mental and verbal domestic abuse? After 167 episodes of Family Guy, someone thought this would be a good idea, to take this character and this whole world that's been developed for comedy and make it as serious as possible for a story about domestic abuse. Whoever's idea that was, probably Seth MacFarlane's, is a moron, because this, in concept, was never going to work. Family Guy is not a show that should be even attempting to talk about a topic as serious as domestic abuse. I know there are a lot of people out there who think, you know what, if you have a platform, you should use it to bring attention to important issues. And I agree with that to a point, but when your platform is held up partially by a character who sexually assaults other characters as a punchline, maybe don't do an episode on domestic abuse. This episode of Family Guy is one of the most tasteless and tone-deaf things I've ever seen in the world of adult animation. But of course, that wasn't the intention. Screams of Silence, the story of Brenda Q, is an episode that had probable good intentions behind it, and I'd even go so far as to say that the story for this episode was pretty well thought out. But the tone, execution, and frankly just the concept for this episode is what makes it so bafflingly stupid. But I want to be fair for me just to shit all over this episode and call it a day. So we are going to dive deep into Screams of Silence, the story of Brenda Q, and see why it's so terrible. The episode opens with Peter telling Lois he's going fishing with the guys, and Peter makes a joke about his former job as a fisherman where he worked with 2 Portuguese men. This leads to Peter making a joke about how the audience doesn't even know what Portuguese means, which sets up a cute little self-aware cutaway gag.
That's what I thought a Portuguese was. Me and my brain, huh? And we're just getting started.
Now, in this opening minute of the episode, the tone has been established as pretty goofy and self-aware, which is what you would expect from most episodes of Family Guy. However, what this episode is actually doing here is setting up a good old-fashioned bait and switch. You think it's gonna be just another goofy, fun episode of Family Guy, but it turns out it's a very special, dramatic episode. Except the only problem is, it keeps flip-flopping between goofy comedy and incredibly intense, serious drama. But we'll get back to that whole problem later. Peter is sitting with Joe, ready to go fishing, but Quagmire hasn't shown up yet. After another lighthearted and pretty funny scene, Peter and Joe decide to go to Quagmire's house to see what's keeping him from their fishing trip. Peter and Joe enter the house and are shocked to see Quagmire hanging after an autoerotic asphyxiation mishap. Peter and Joe rush over to save Quagmire while clown pornography plays in the background. Peter, Joe, and the whole Griffin family are in the hospital where it is revealed that Quagmire is in a coma. Lois asks Peter if he's alerted Quagmire's family, and Peter says that Quagmire's sister is on her way with her boyfriend. Quagmire's sister, Brenda, and her boyfriend, Jeff, pull into the hospital, and Jeff is seen holding a beer and yelling at Brenda from the first moment he's on screen. There is no nuance or subtlety to how the writers are approaching the topic of domestic abuse. From the very first second Jeff and Brenda are on screen, it's clear that there is something wrong within their relationship. Brenda sings an old nursery rhyme for Quagmire from their childhood, while Jeff continues to delegitimize, mock, and insult Brenda. Quagmire wakes up from his coma at the sound of his sister singing, and Brenda hugs him right as he awakes. This hug causes Jeff to freak out because he is so insecure, he thinks Brenda's brother, Quagmire, is hitting on her. Peter, Lois, Jeff, and Brenda help Quagmire into his house and onto the couch, and then Brenda offers to stay with Quagmire for as long as he needs. Brenda offering to stay with Quagmire causes Jeff to freak out once again, and he once again shows how he is mentally abusive to Brenda. Wow, that was a lot of information incredibly quickly, and it was also very, very, very blunt. This episode is about as subtle as a brick with the words domestic abuse written across it that is then thrown through a window. There's nothing clever or thoughtful about how the issue of domestic abuse is shown. It's just a very blunt and general presentation of what this kind of abuse tends to look like. And while I would have liked to have a little bit more subtlety, this is Family Guy we're talking about, and subtlety doesn't tend to be this show's strong suit. But then again, drama isn't either, so, maybe avoid that too, but hey, it's blunt, straightforward presentation of abuse that is easy for the audience to understand. And that definitely is not something worth criticizing. What is worth criticizing is the tone-defying jokes that are sprinkled in throughout this episode. The jokes in the opening of this episode really aren't that bad, but the placement and timing of them is way off. Now, I think the writers were just trying to add a little bit of levity to this very serious story, but it comes across as tasteless. There's one particular joke that really muddies the waters of this episode's story. Jeff makes fun of Brenda for trying to wake up Quagmire with singing, and then Peter laughs along with Jeff.
Come on, Brenda. A stupid nursery rhyme isn't gonna wake him up, especially the way you sing. Right, man?
This scene in particular makes it really hard to tell what this episode is going for tone-wise. Is the episode making fun of domestic abuse, or is it making fun of abusers because they're so insecure? Am I supposed to take the situation with Quagmire's sister seriously, or should I be laughing along with Peter and at the jokes that are mixed in throughout the episode and just kind of ignore that whole storyline and how serious it is? The intention behind the execution of this episode is really uncertain, especially in the opening. And that makes the tone feel like it's changing every 30 seconds because it basically is changing every 30 seconds. The episode is set up with a goofy, light-hearted story, and then it takes a dramatic turn when Quagmire's life is in danger. Now, it would be fine if the episode just stuck with the dramatic tone that they set up in the first few minutes with Quagmire, but they just keep on trying to make jokes that I would argue aren't bad, but just horribly out of place in the context of this episode. And keep in mind, we are only through the first 4 minutes of this episode, and the tone is about to get way more muddled. Jeff continues to scream at and demean Brenda through the night as Quagmire struggles to sleep while overhearing it, and the scene where Quagmire tosses and turns in bed as he hears his sister getting berated by a piece of human trash like that, it's honestly kinda heartbreaking. I genuinely felt for Quagmire and his sister in this scene, and yes, this is the same Quagmire that's gone around sexually assaulting women for the last 10 seasons or so. Even though this is the last character I would think I'd find some relatability in, I felt it in this scene. It just goes to show you that if you have a careful approach, you can make a character work in any kind of context. The only problem is, you have to be able to maintain a consistent tone, otherwise these emotional moments would be undercut by jokes that feel wildly out of place. And hey, speaking of jokes that are wildly out of place, directly after this heartbreaking moment, there's a really funny joke That is wildly out of place. Now, I absolutely love this joke where Quagmire's face looks like it's being distorted through the peephole, but then it turns out that's just his face from not sleeping well. It's a good bit, but it feels really out of place given the scene that happened literally directly before this. And this happens constantly throughout this episode. There will be a dramatic scene with a lot of tension and buildup, and then it's completely undercut by a pretty good Joker cutaway gag. And what makes this episode especially weird is the fact that I think most of the jokes and cutaways are pretty good. I've mentioned it a few times now. There are some quality jokes in this episode, but they just come at the worst possible time. These out-of-place jokes are the main reason why this episode feels so tone-deaf. The tone is constantly changing from lighthearted to incredibly serious, from goofy and fun to dramatic and tense. After this dramatic scene with Quagmire in bed, we get the peephole gag. Then Quagmire talks with Peter and Lois about how horrible Jeff is, and then we get a cutaway where Peter says Jeff is as mean as an Iraq lobster, and we get the Iraq lobster bit that I'm sure many of you have seen on like TikTok or Reels or whatever.
Death to America and butter sauce.
That's insane. That's an insane thing to do. Now look, I don't want to be like overly mean to the team that worked on this episode because they're real people who are doing real things and I like a lot of their work. I don't want to be too mean about it. Clearly, this episode didn't have bad intentions behind it. They weren't trying to make something that was tasteless and tone deaf. They were trying to make something that, get this, would actually work, like most people do when they're working on something. They want it to be good. But this just is so poorly thought out and so stupid. I mean, I cannot believe we go from a very serious conversation to the Iraq lobster bit. The Iraq lobster bit, of all things, is in the episode about domestic abuse. Why not save it for the Star Wars episode or something? Just take all of the jokes out of this episode and put them in a different one. Maybe you make an extra episode this season with all the jokes you didn't use in this one, because the jokes aren't bad, but if you put them in an episode about a topic as serious as this, it makes the whole thing come across as tone-deaf, tasteless, and widely just misguided. It makes the writers look stupid, frankly, and they've proven in the past and since this episode that they're not stupid. So I'm more just confused than anything else, and we still have so much of this episode to get through. So, good God, bear with me. I need to breathe into a bag or something. Quagmire asks Lois to take Brenda out in hopes that Lois can talk her into leaving Jeff, as Quagmire has already tried and failed. It's at lunch with Brenda where we learn that Jeff is not only mentally abusive, but he is also physically abusive. Lois tries to convince Brenda to leave Jeff, but Brenda continues to make excuses for Jeff's behavior. We then cut to Quagmire, Joe, and Peter drinking at the Drunken Clam. Quagmire is frustrated and feels hopeless about the situation with his sister, and Joe says there's nothing he can do unless Brenda files a report. So Quagmire, Joe, Peter, and the whole Griffin family decide to hold an intervention for Brenda in hopes they can get her to leave her abusive relationship. This intervention features more good but out-of-place jokes and another fairly effective scene with Quagmire and his sister. It's clear at this point that there is a story within this episode that sort of works, but the way it's presented with the jokes and cutaway gags just makes the whole thing feel kind of trivial and pointless. After Quagmire gives a heartfelt speech to his sister, it seems like things may be moving in the right direction, but then Jeff comes storming in, and Brenda reluctantly announces that Jeff and her are engaged. This announcement is a shock to everyone in the room, but what's even more shocking is the announcement that Brenda is pregnant. Quagmire is horrified upon hearing this news, and the episode makes sure to tastefully punctuate this difficult-to-navigate situation by having Peter list possible names for the baby, like Slappy or Keep It Down in There'sy.
Oh, congratulations! Have you thought of any names yet? Maybe Slappy? Or Bruisey? Or keep it down in there,
We then cut to Peter, Joe, and Quagmire playing poker and talking about how hopeless this whole situation with Brenda is. But then, Quagmire proposes a drastic idea. He suggests that they just kill Jeff so they can save his sister and prevent Jeff from hurting anyone else. Joe refuses this idea and threatens to arrest Quagmire for even suggesting it. But then, from across the street, Peter, Joe, and Quagmire hear Jeff verbally and physically abusing Brenda. After witnessing this, Joe agrees that they should team up and kill Jeff. Now, this scene where Joe, Quagmire, and Peter overhear and see what's happening to Brenda is a great example of how this episode toes and then slips over the line for what is respectable when talking about a topic like abuse. This episode is consistently really close to doing everything tastefully, but since this is Family Guy, there is always a joke shoehorned in somewhere. Even in this scene, where a character is being physically, verbally, and mentally abused, and we're supposed to take it seriously, the writers felt the need to make the core of the scene centered around a joke.
We're watching Leno, you bitch!
I'm so sorry.
His soft, gentle humor connects effortlessly with my mainstream sensibilities.
I can absolutely see what they're going for with this scene. They wanted it to be serious, but also for there still to be jokes at the core of the story, but the execution just feels so tasteless and cheap. Despite the fact that I like a lot of the jokes in this episode, like Iraq Lobster or the peephole bit, they take away from the main focus of the episode. There is no B-plot in this episode. It is exclusively about Quagmire's sister being in an abusive relationship. This is not a story that benefits from having dumb jokes shoved into it, even if they are really good dumb jokes. The mix of humor and drama in this episode doesn't work, and it comes across as tasteless and tone deaf. But in fairness, this episode isn't done yet. Does it pull it out? Does it become tasteful at the end and respectable to this very serious topic? Peter, Joe, and Quagmire invite Jeff out on a midnight hunting trip, and Jeff quickly agrees. And this scene about domestic abuse, where Peter, Joe, and Quagmire see Quagmire's sister being abused by Jeff, is punctuated with a terrible cutaway gag about Meg of all characters in this show. And then they set off. The four are sitting in the woods, and Jeff stands up to go to the bathroom. Quagmire says he's going to kill him as soon as he comes back, but it turns out Jeff was onto them, and he returns with a shotgun of his own. There's more out-of-place jokes, and finally, Jeff drives Quagmire deep into the woods, leaving Joe and Peter behind to freeze to death. Just as Jeff is ready to kill Quagmire, Quagmire says Jeff is too scared to fight him without a gun, and unbelievably, this causes Jeff to throw his gun to the side, and the two start fighting for a very, very long time. Jeff gets the better of Quagmire, and then we get a long, very dragged out scene where Jeff is strangling Quagmire and seemingly kills him. Jeff then starts digging a hole to bury Quagmire's corpse in, when suddenly a car turns on and the headlights shine out, illuminating Jeff, revealing Quagmire is still alive. Remember at the start of the episode where Quagmire hung himself to masturbate? Well, that comes back in the third act. Screenwriting 101 in action. See, it's actually a great episode. Quagmire runs down Jeff and kills him. Peter, Joe, and Quagmire return home to Brenda and say that Jeff decided to leave her. And then the episode ends with Brenda bawling her eyes out and Peter saying he feels like killing someone else now. Peter then excitedly thinks of Mort as his next target for murder, and then the episode ends. Brenda is still pregnant, Quagmire is a murderer, and no one seemed to learn or grow in any way, shape, or form. The end. So after all of that, Quagmire kills Jeff, and we end on a joke that doesn't add anything to the story of the episode, but is still kind of funny. And that's my main takeaway after diving deep into Screams of Silence, the story of Brenda Q. The fact that this is a comedy takes away from the story that's being told. The jokes work on their own in this episode, and the story, I would argue, does work on its own. But together, they just can't coexist. I can see why people defend this episode so regularly because, frankly, there is stuff here that can be defended logically from a writing standpoint. There are some effective dramatic scenes and some effective comedic scenes. Drama and comedy is like water and oil in the case of Family Guy. It just doesn't mix. But that's not to say a dramatic story can't have comedic notes and moments. Look at Barry, for instance, a dramatic comedy that also deals with the subject of mental, verbal, and physical abuse. The difference between Barry and Family Guy, though, is that Barry was always setting out to be a comedy and a drama, while Family Guy was primarily focused on being a comedy. Screams of Silence comes 10 seasons into Family Guy's run, and at this point, the tone and feeling of the show has been established. An episode like this, about a topic as serious as this, was never going to work within the confines of Family Guy, even if the writers did try their very hardest to make this work. It's clear they put a lot of thought and effort into this episode and tried their darndest to make a square peg fit in a circle hole, but frankly, it just didn't work. After going through this episode multiple times in the course of making this video, I feel pretty confident in saying this wasn't any sort of ego project or something like that. Screams of Silence feels like a genuine attempt to tell a dramatic story about something important, but it just fails miserably. When compared to episodes like Brian and Stewie or Life of Brian, two other episodes I've talked about on the channel, this episode feels a lot more genuine from a creative standpoint. Brian and Stewie felt like forced Emmy bait born out of ego, and Life of Brian felt like a desperate cry for attention that quickly was revealed to be a waste of time. But Screams of Silence, the story of Brenda Q, just feels like a genuine swing and a miss. There are plenty of things this episode does right. The problem is the things it does right just doesn't fit together. It's like having two puzzles that are both pretty dang good and they paint a really nice picture once it's complete, and then you sort of mixed them together and did your best to make one image out of the two puzzles. And that's just a recipe for a jumbled mess. So, would I recommend Screams of Silence, the story of Brenda Q? No. If you want a story that has comedy and smartly addresses the topic of abuse, watch Barry or BoJack Horseman, not Family Guy. Frankly, if you're watching Family Guy for any sort of dramatic storytelling, you're probably a moron. Sorry. But that's gonna do it for this video, for this episode. I don't really want to talk about it anymore. Thank you all very much for watching. This video was a bit of a headache to put together, I think mostly because the episode is just so frustrating on its own. It really is a hodgepodge of like two different things that just don't mix together. It's fascinating, but it's not worth watching yourself. I still wouldn't recommend that. It's not worth your time. There's other stuff to check out. There's other stuff out there like Tearjerker, the episode of American Dad that we will be covering next week sometime. That's my next video. I have it all planned out. I've already got my footage recorded. I've got my script started off. We are good to go. And hopefully I'll have some stuff backlogged for the third week of March for PAX East, because I'll be kicking around over there. So if you're going to be there, cool. Maybe we'll bump into each other. But if not, hey, you could still watch some cool Mr. Cow content about cartoons. So there you go. Like and subscribe, I guess. I'm going to go eat a sandwich now. Bye-bye.